They handcuffed me on a quiet street in broad daylight, threw me against the hood, laughed, mocked my rank. All because I was black in a nice car and dared to stay calm. They didn't ask who I was, but they should have, because 30 minutes later, black SUVs from the Pentagon arrived. And when I made the call, their careers ended. I am Major General Celeste Dawson. And this is how two racist cops tried to humiliate a decorated U.S. Army general and accidentally ignited a national reckoning. That day, he slammed me against the hood of the patrol car, the cold metal pressing into my cheek like an accusation. The cuffs clicked hard around my wrists, tight, deliberate. I remember the sound not loud, but sharp, final, as if I'd already been sentenced for a crime I hadn't committed, all because I was black, in uniform, and driving a luxury car. They didn't ask for my name. They didn't check the tags. They just saw a black woman in a black BMW on a quiet suburban road, and they acted on what they thought they knew. Behind the officer, standing smug with her hands on her hips, was a blonde woman in mirrored sunglasses, her badge gleaming under the late morning sun like a challenge. Sergeant Karen Wilcox. Her radio crackled at her shoulder, her jaw locked in a permanent smirk. A clipboard peeked from under her arm. To her, I was just another problem to eliminate. I could hear whispers, murmurs, the thrum of tires slowing down as passers-by rubbernecked. Someone was filming. I could feel their camera on me like a second layer of skin. "Step back, ma'am." "She's resisting," the male officer barked. His name tag read Malloy, and he looked young. Early 30s, maybe, built like a linebacker. His grip on my arm tightened when I didn't flinch. Resisting. I was standing still. No sudden moves, no raised voice, no protest. I'd been trained to survive worse than this, but in that moment, none of it mattered. To them, I was just another threat. My name is Celeste Dawson, and this was the day two small-town officers tried to destroy my dignity on a street corner in Montgomery County. But what they didn't know was, I am a major general in the United States Army. I had flown into Maryland the night before. My niece Maya was graduating magna cum laude from Howard University, and I'd promised her I'd be there front row in dress blues, cheering like a one-woman battalion. It was a rare moment of softness for me. I'd lived most of my life on alert-serving tours in Afghanistan, overseeing logistics operations across Europe, sitting at long metal tables inside the Pentagon, while generals barked orders and wars unfolded in PowerPoint slides. So, when I picked up the BMW rental that morning, neatly pressed in my Navy civilian suit medals, tucked in my carry-on hair, pulled back with military precision, I didn't expect to be stopped 2 blocks from my hotel. The lights flashed behind me at a 4-way stop. I thought maybe a tail light was out. I pulled over calmly, even turned on the hazard lights. Then they approached. Wilcox on the driver's side, mirrored sunglasses hiding her eyes. Malloy to my right hand, already near his holster. "License and registration," Wilcox said, coldly, peering in as if expecting something dangerous to leap from the glove box. I smiled. The same smile I used when foreign diplomats tried to challenge my authority in strategy briefings. "Of course, officer. May I ask why I've been stopped?" "You fit the description," she said. "Stolen vehicle reported just an hour ago. Black BMW female driver." I blinked. "Officer, this is a rental. Here's the agreement. Step out of the vehicle." Her tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. It dripped with a different kind of power assumption. I could have shown them my Pentagon ID, my badge, my credentials, but I didn't want to pull rank. I never led with my title. I believed in law. indiscipline, indecency. So I stepped out, and that's when it happened. The shove, the cuffs, the murmurs, the shame. They didn't search me. They didn't read me my rights. They just kept repeating that I was a suspect. I could hear Wilcox calling in my plates, but she twisted the information intentionally, mispronouncing my last name. I watched her lips curl slightly as she said it, Dawson. Like the actor, not the general. I felt heat behind my eyes. Not from pain, but from the humiliation. The pain would come later. A crowd was forming. A young man across the street had pulled out his phone and was filming. I met his eyes. He lowered his camera slightly, like he didn't want to violate me, but I nodded once. Let them see. Let the world see. Wilcox walked around my car like a lioness circling prey. She tapped on the trunk, kicked the tires, then opened the door without asking. Inside my uniform, hung perfectly from the passenger hook hat, perched neatly on the seat. She picked it up, turned it over in her hands, then dropped it into the street. It landed on the asphalt, a fine layer of dust collecting on the eagle insignia. I closed my eyes. That was the final straw. I straightened cuffs and all. "Officer Wilcox," I said. My voice was steel now. "I advise you to stop this immediately and call the Department of Defense. Ask for General Hart, or better yet, call the Pentagon's Public Affairs Office." Wilcox laughed. "Oh, I've heard a lot of stories, lady," she sneered. "But this a general in a beamer. You people always have the best imaginations." "You people," she said. God help her. Malloy looked less confident now. He walked away to his cruiser, clearly unnerved. I could tell he was trying to confirm something, but Wilcox waved him off. "She's bluffing. Just keep her detained until we get confirmation from HQ. HQ for what? They had no idea who they were messing with. I'd once negotiated airspace clearance over NATO borders in 12 minutes flat. They were about to learn what real command looked like. The younger officer, maybe a rookie, stood nervously near the sidewalk. His nameplate read Rodriguez, and he hadn't said a word since the stop. But I saw him glance at my hat on the ground, then at me. He stepped back, took out his phone, made a call. 15 minutes later, a rumble passed through the street like thunder rolling across a battlefield. 3 black SUVs, Pentagon plates, a 4th car, black Crown Vic, pulled up beside the patrol vehicle. A tall woman in civilian clothes stepped out first. Slim, composed salt and pepper hair tucked behind her ears. Her eyes locked on mine, and the color drained from Wilcox's face. Brigadier General Linda Hart, not a phone call, not a press release. She had come in person. Release her. Hart said, her voice flat and terrifying. Wilcox stammered. "Ma'am, we had probable. Release her. Now." Malloy uncuffed me, hands shaking. The key fumbled once before the metal opened. I didn't look at them. I just walked to Hart, picked up my hat from the pavement, dusted it off, and nodded once. She opened the SUV door for me herself. I stepped in. Not a single word spoken. Not yet. As we pulled away from the curb, I looked back through the tinted glass. Wilcox was still standing in the middle of the street, her clipboard hanging limp in her hands. Malloy had slumped into the car. Rodriguez stood frozen by the tree-eyes wide phone still in his palm. And the crowd. Oh, the crowd was no longer murmuring. They were shouting, applauding, filming. The video would be online in hours, and their careers finished in minutes. I didn't smile. Not yet. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. And God help them when the rest of the world saw what they did to a decorated general, to a black woman who bled for her country. Because I wasn't just cuffed, I was ignited. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, in the heart of a neighborhood that still bore the scars of fire hoses and dogs from a time not long past. My grandmother, Miss Lily May, used to say our streets were paved in memory, bloody, righteous memory. She marched in, 63, got pushed down by a white officer outside 16th Street Baptist Church. I still carry that image. I carry her spine. I am Major General Celeste Dawson, United States Army, decorated with 3 stars and 27 years of service. I don't say that to boast. I say that because it matters. It mattered that day. It mattered when they threw me against a car like I was nothing. Because for some people I will always be nothing no matter how many medals rest on my chest. But I was not born to be nothing. From the start, I knew I was different. I wasn't soft like my cousin Latrice, who dreamed of dance recitals and silk curtains. I was sharp edges and straight lines. I watched war documentaries before I knew what love felt like. My heroes wore boots and barked orders. At 12, I shaved my head for the first time. At 14, I could disassemble a rifle faster than my ROTC instructor. I enlisted on my 18th birthday. That was the day I stopped being a girl and became a weapon. My first deployment was in Mosul, Iraq. The heat could melt steel, and the fear in your gut became second nature like hunger or thirst. But I thrived in it. Not because I was brave, but because structure saved me. Structure doesn't judge your skin. Structure doesn't smirk when you walk into a room. Structure doesn't assume you stole the damn car you're driving. People do. People like Sergeant Wilcox. I worked my way up slowly. No favors. No legacy admissions. I didn't have a last name that opened doors, just a relentless ethic and a refusal to bend. I ran logistics in Kandahar, trained NATO forces in Latvia, led cyber defense operations back home. By 42, I was one of 5 black women to ever reach the rank of Major General. And let me tell you, every inch of that rank was carved in fire. Not from combat, but from America itself. Because long before I had to dodge bullets overseas, I learned to dodge prejudice in my own backyard. They told me I was too harsh, too masculine, too intimidating. They used words like angry and difficult like grenades disguised as compliments. I learned to temper my voice. Tilt my chin, soften my walk, just enough to make them almost comfortable. But not too much, never too much, because I refused to disappear for their comfort. People think wearing a uniform gives you immunity. It doesn't. It gives you responsibility. Responsibility to show up polished, to hold your ground, to be twice as prepared, twice as calm, twice as forgiving. That morning I had my uniform ironed, my ribbons aligned, my Pentagon-issued ID ready to be shown if needed. And still, none of it mattered. Not to them. You want to know the real reason I didn't pull out my badge the moment they stopped me. Because I was tired of having to prove my right to exist. Because I wanted to see how far they'd go before realizing who they were dealing with. Because sometimes the only way to expose rot is to let it reveal itself. And they did. In front of witnesses. In front of cameras. In front of history. Let me tell you about my niece Maya. She's the reason I flew to Maryland. She's the reason I wore my Navy suit that day instead of my uniform, because I wanted her to shine without my shadow. Maya grew up watching me train cadets on the base, listening to me command rooms full of men who never imagined a black woman outranking them. When she was 10, she stood up to a substitute teacher who claimed Rosa Parks was just tired. When she was 12, she told me she wanted to be a civil rights lawyer. When she was 17, she was already giving speeches that made people cry. I promised her I'd be there front row when she walked across that stage. Instead, I was almost booked into a county jail 2 blocks away. After the incident, when I sat quietly in that SUV beside General Hart, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't ask why. I asked how. How, after all these years, do people like Wilcox still wear a badge? How many others had she silenced? How many hadn't been lucky enough to wear the rank I did? Because if they could do that to me, what had they done to the voiceless? The Pentagon didn't take it lightly. They responded like I had been taken hostage, because I had. Hostage to a system that still fears black power in uniform. Hostage to a sickness that hides behind policy and protocol. They assigned a task force within an hour. Media started circling. The video went viral that evening, over 3 million views by midnight. People were angry, rightfully so, but I wasn't done. That night, in my hotel, I sat alone in the dark, replaying the day in my head like battle footage. Not to dwell, but to strategize. I didn't want apologies. I didn't want press conferences. I wanted accountability, and I knew exactly how to make that happen, because I am not just a general. I am a tactician. I've orchestrated missions that moved 5,000 troops and billions in equipment without a single casualty. Now I would orchestrate justice. The next morning I wore my uniform, polished boots, gold epaulets, medals gleaming like armor. I walked into the Pentagon like the storm they never saw coming, and every eye turned, not in surprise, in shame, because they had all seen the video. And now they waited to see what a black woman with power would do. And I did what I always do. I led. Power doesn't always wear stars or stripes. Sometimes it hides behind a pair of dark sunglasses and a smug smile. That's who she was, Sergeant Karen Wilcox. Cold, calculated, convinced the world owed her obedience. She didn't see me as a woman, a veteran, or even a human being that morning. She saw a threat, a disruption to her illusion of control. Let me tell you something about the badge. It's supposed to be a symbol of service, of duty, of protection. But in the wrong hands, it becomes a mirror for ego. And Wilcox's ego was the size of the very department she thought she ruled. I studied her from the corner of my eye while she strutted around my car that day, tapping the glass like it would confess something. She carried herself like she ran the town. Her mouth didn't move much, but when it did, the venom poured out slow, calculated, not reckless. She wasn't just a bad cop. She was a true believer, believed in her power, believed in the system that had always protected her, believed in her right to define who belonged and who didn't. And I didn't, not in her eyes. The records came to my desk 3 days after the incident. A thick envelope, hand-delivered by a senior officer with a grim face. I opened it slowly, expecting a rap sheet, but not the novel that fell into my lap. 17 complaints. 17, all buried unsubstantiated or mysteriously closed, all targeting Black and Latino drivers, all following the same pattern. Suspected stolen vehicle non-compliance driver appeared agitated, and not one of them had ever led to actual charges. But Sergeant Wilcox, she got commendations, year after year. Why? Because she was effective. Then there was her partner, Officer Brent Malloy. You could see the insecurity bleeding from him like sweat through a polyester uniform. Young, square-jawed, built like a football reject with a temper he couldn't quite suppress. Malloy didn't think. He followed. He didn't act out of authority. He acted out of fear. And what he feared most was women like me. Women who didn't flinch, who didn't shrink themselves to fit his idea of small. I watched the body cam footage 3 times. Once for anger, once for confirmation, and once for strategy. Malloy was the one who placed the cuffs on me. His hands shook, but he didn't stop. He never once asked my name, never verified the plate beyond what Wilcox barked into the radio. He looked me in the eye and still couldn't see me, because he'd already decided who I was, and that was the rot. But not everyone in uniform that day was corrupted. Officer Rodriguez, the rookie who made the call to the Pentagon. He was quiet, observant, and uncomfortable, and I remember the look in his eyes, the hesitation, the doubt. He wasn't sure what he was seeing, but he knew it wasn't right. That gave me the one thing I needed to act a witness inside the walls. Someone who could tell the truth when the time came. Because when truth meets ego, truth needs armor. And I am that armor. 2 days after the video went viral, I received an invitation, if you could call it that, to speak at a closed-door review panel hosted by the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. The invitation was signed by none other than Captain Ellis Vance, head of Internal Affairs, and an old acquaintance from my officer training years. I knew Vance. He played the system like chess, never showed emotion, never acted unless it served him. If he was bringing me in, it wasn't for justice. It was to contain the fire. I arrived in full-dress uniform, the same one Wilcox tossed into the street. Hat square, boots gleaming, decorations on full display. The moment I stepped into the panel room, the oxygen shifted. Wilcox was there. So was Malloy. Captain Vance sat in the center arms, folded his face unreadable. Rodriguez stood in the back, straight as a pin lips pressed into a thin line. I took my seat and waited. Major General Dawson Vance began. "We want to express our regret for the incident." I raised a hand. "This isn't a ceremony, Captain. Let's skip the pageantry." Wilcox scoffed. "Still playing the victim, huh?" Her voice was low but sharp. I turned to her, slowly, deliberately. "Sergeant, if I were playing the victim, I'd have called CNN, not the Pentagon." Silence. Malloy shifted uncomfortably beside her. Rodriguez's eyes flicked toward me, then back to the table. Vance tried to steer things back to neutral. Tensions were high. Misidentification happens. Officers make split-second decisions based on— I stood up. On what? My skin, my car, my silence. I walked toward the screen behind him, pulled out the USB from my pocket. "Let me show you what your split second looked like from my perspective." I played the body cam footage, paused it on the frame where my uniform hit the pavement, paused again when Wilcox said, "You people." Then let the silence settle. Let it choke the room. "You think this is about hurt feelings?" I asked. "It's about pattern. About authority abused and accountability denied. About the rot that grows when silence is easier than truth." Wilcox stood. "You think just because you've got medals and cameras you can come in here and—" "Sit down," Vance snapped, the first time he broke form. Wilcox glared at him. Malloy's face paled. Rodriguez stepped forward. "Sir," he said quietly, "she's telling the truth." Every eye turned. Rodriguez continued. She told them who she was. They ignored her. The sergeant laughed at her ID and said she didn't care who she was. That cracked the dam. Vance leaned back, sighing. "Major General Dawson, I assume you're filing a formal complaint." I looked him dead in the eye. "No, I'm launching an investigation." Pause. "The Pentagon has opened an inquiry into jurisdictional overreach and civil rights violations. And I will be testifying before the House Oversight Committee next week." Wilcox's jaw dropped. Malloy stood at panic, flooding his features. "You can't. This isn't even." "It is now," I said, buttoning my jacket. As I walked out of that room, I didn't feel vindicated. Not yet, but I felt momentum. The first rumble before the avalanche. Because once the cracks appear in the wall, it only takes one more truth to bring it down. And I wasn't just carrying one. I was carrying an entire history. There's a moment during every interrogation, military or civilian, when you realize the truth isn't the goal. It's control. That's what that day on the sidewalk was about. Not law, not safety. Control. The way they grabbed my wrist. The way they ignored my words. The way Wilcox kicked my hat as if it meant nothing. They weren't looking for justice. They were looking to remind me of my place. But they picked the wrong woman, because my place was at the head of the table. And soon they would see me there. After the internal panel meeting, I went back to my hotel and sat for a long time in silence. I didn't touch the bottle of water next to me. Didn't take off my boots. I stared out the window, watching the street below. Watching a black teenager walk past two officers. The way he tensed. The way he didn't run, but he didn't breathe either. That tension, that familiar hum of survival, was something I thought I'd left behind in the 90s. Apparently, it never left me. The next morning, I received a call from Pentagon Press Affairs. "Ma'am, you need to see this." The video. Footage taken by the young man across the street posted to TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, everywhere. It began with my car, then me stepping out calmly, then Wilcox pushing me hard against the hood. The camera caught everything. The cuffs, the smirk, the laugh, and finally the voice of Wilcox saying, "You people love to pretend you're something special." The final frame, my dress uniform lying in the dirt. By that afternoon it had over 18 million views. Comments pouring in. "She's a general WTF. This is how we treat our heroes. This is why we kneel. Arrest Wilcox." The hashtags started trending. General Dawson. You people. Justice for Celeste. News anchors were calling me by name before I'd given a single interview. But I wasn't interested in their coverage. I was interested in change. That afternoon, I walked into the Montgomery County Board of Supervisors office. Not with cameras, not with media, just with facts, and my uniform. Because when a system needs dismantling, you don't bring fire. You bring evidence. I handed them the file, every complaint against Wilcox, every recording the testimony from Officer Rodriguez, and the proof of my Pentagon clearance. They blinked, and I knew. The foundation beneath their feet had just begun to crack. But Wilcox wasn't going down quietly. By the next morning, she was on local radio, playing the victim, calling it a misunderstanding, saying she feared for her safety, claimed I was aggressive, that I refused to comply, that rank shouldn't be used to threaten law enforcement. She cried. I watched the footage in my hotel room as she dabbed fake tears with tissue, and something inside me snapped. Not rage, not pain, something colder. Resolve. I called General Hart. "I'm ready to make a public statement." She paused. "Are you sure?" "Yes, it's not just about me anymore." And it wasn't. It was about every black woman pulled over for looking out of place. Every soldier asked if their rank was affirmative action. Every veteran treated like an outsider in the country they served. We held the press conference on the steps of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Not the Pentagon. Not the courthouse. Because this was history. I stepped to the podium in full-dress blues sunlight, catching the medals on my chest like fire. I didn't raise my voice, didn't shed a tear. I looked into the cameras and said, I was not humiliated because of a mistake. I was humiliated because I didn't look like what they expected a general to look like. I didn't resist arrest. I resisted erasure. My story is public because I wore stars. But how many others suffered in silence because no one believed they had the right to speak? The crowd applauded. Some wept. Others stood with fists raised high. And that afternoon, Montgomery County Police Department received more than 3,000 calls demanding disciplinary action. But still, Wilcox wasn't done. Later that evening, I received a summons from her lawyer, a defamation suit. She was suing me for emotional damages. Can you believe that? The woman who humiliated me on a public sidewalk, the woman who mocked my rank, was now saying she had been emotionally injured. Her arrogance knew no limit, but neither did my discipline, because what she didn't know was that I had something she'd never understand: composure. I'd trained snipers on self-restraint. I'd given orders during live combat operations. I'd buried soldiers and folded flags for grieving families. A lawsuit. That was a game for people who had nothing left to lose. I met with my legal team. We combed through body cam footage, social media history, even past deposition transcripts. Turns out, Wilcox had used you people before, more than once. And she wasn't careful with what she texted either. We found messages, leaked screenshots, a private Facebook group full of racist memes. The blue wall was about to collapse. 3 days later, the Civilian Review Board convened. This time it was public, cameras rolling, every chair filled. And when I entered the room, there was no smugness left in Wilcox's face. She was pale, sweating. Malloy wouldn't meet my eyes. Rodriguez sat straight-backed, hands folded. I took my seat, pulled the microphone close, and opened with the words that would echo across the country. The badge is not a shield to hide behind. It is a promise to protect, and when it's used to harm, the consequences must be just as public as the crime. What followed was a 4-hour hearing where every lie was stripped bare. Footage, testimonies, records. Every humiliation they had tried to bury came roaring to life. And when it was over, there was only one path left for them. I've commanded drone strikes on hostile terrain, coordinated rescue operations under heavy fire, issued orders that shifted the outcomes of battles. But nothing I ever authorized made more noise, more impact than a single phone call made by a nervous young officer named Rodriguez, holding a department-issued cell phone with trembling hands. That call didn't go through to dispatch. It went straight to the Pentagon, and it detonated through Washington, D.C., like a controlled blast ripping through concrete. By the time I stepped off the board hearing stage, the fallout had already begun. 3 major news networks were running full timelines of the incident. The video had surpassed 35 million views. And then came the real quake. The Department of Justice launched an official civil rights inquiry into the Montgomery County Police Department. Wilcox and Malloy were placed on administrative leave, but the writing was already etched in steel. The public didn't want silence. They wanted justice. Meanwhile, I received a message from General Hart. Just 5 words. It's time to brief Congress. 2 days later, I found myself standing in front of the House Oversight Committee, wearing my uniform like armor, facing lawmakers from both sides of the aisle. Some stared with respect, others with skepticism, all with curiosity. I wasn't just a general now. I was a symbol, not by choice but by necessity. I opened with a statement that came not from a speechwriter, but from my core. This isn't about me. This is about a culture, one that allows bias to masquerade as procedure ego, to eclipse duty and power, to go unchecked when the badge becomes the badge of shame. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I testified. About the years I stayed quiet even when slurs were whispered in briefing rooms. About being mistaken for a secretary even in full uniform. About the quiet exhaustion that follows every black soldier who ever had to prove their worth twice before being saluted once. One congresswoman asked, "Why didn't you just show them your ID?" I looked her in the eye and replied, "Because no citizen should have to display their rank to avoid being dehumanized. Because one day it might not be a general they pull over. It might be your son, your daughter, and they might not walk away." The room went still. Then it erupted. Applause, tears, a standing ovation not for me, but for the truth I'd carried in silence for far too long. Back in Montgomery County, the storm didn't wait. Civilian protests lined up outside the police station. Hundreds of people. Black-white veterans, students, mothers with strollers all holding signs. Justice for Celeste. Reform now. The badge isn't a weapon. Wilcox made her last public statement that night, flanked by her lawyer defiant to the end. She claimed the media twisted everything, said she'd feared for her life, insisted she followed protocol. But the Pentagon release shredded her narrative in a single paragraph. Major General Celeste Dawson is a senior U.S. Army official in good standing. Her identification was clear. Her conduct was compliant. The arrest was unlawful and offensive to the standards we uphold as a nation. Within 24 hours, she was terminated. So was Malloy. And not just from the force, but stripped of pension authority and certification. The final blow came from the governor's office. An emergency executive order, effective immediately. All police departments across the state are required to implement body cam transparency, independent oversight boards, and mandatory bias training in response to the events surrounding Major General Dawson's unlawful detainment. I watched it all unfold from a quiet bench in front of my hotel, my dress hat in my lap, my niece Maya beside me. She held my hand, eyes shimmering. "You broke it wide open," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "We did." Every person who refused to be silent, every eye that watched, every voice that screamed into the void, they heard us. That night, I returned to my hotel room and stared at the mirror for a long time. I didn't see a general. I didn't see a victim. I saw a woman who carried her grandmother's scars, her mother's warnings, her own battle-earned medals, and, finally, her truth. I laid my hat on the desk, then made one last call. To a name scrawled on the corner of a police report. "Officer Rodriguez." He answered nervously. "Ma'am, you saved lives when you picked up that phone," I told him. "You did what was right, not what was easy." He hesitated. "I didn't know what would happen. I just knew it was wrong." "That's how change starts," I said. "That's how history shifts." He didn't respond, but I could hear the breath in his voice change, steady, now stronger. In the weeks that followed, I received thousands of messages. From soldiers, from mothers, from kids who saw me and said, "That's what courage looks like." But courage isn't loud. It's not always fists and fire. Sometimes it's standing still with cuffs on your wrists and refusing to disappear. Power protects itself. That's the unspoken creed of the Blue Wall. A culture of silence stitched into every badge, every unspoken glance between partners. Every incident report bent just slightly to fit a narrative. But walls, even blue ones, aren't indestructible. All it takes is one crack. One person refusing to lie. One camera, one recording, one voice saying no more. And when that happens, the wall doesn't just crack, it collapses. The Internal Affairs report arrived first. 62 pages long. Dense, clinical damning. It detailed not only my unlawful detainment, but uncovered 14 other incidents involving Sergeant Wilcox, each one hidden behind paperwork and procedural smokescreens. 3 civilians had filed excessive force claims. 2 drivers had alleged racial profiling. All cases were dismissed without hearing. Now each was being reopened. The public didn't see those files, but I did. And when I read the line complainant described officer laughing during search of vehicle, I felt bile rise in my throat. They hadn't just tried to humiliate me. They'd made it a pattern. Montgomery County's Chief of Police, Mark P. Linfield, held a press conference 2 days later. He stood under the department seal, face gray mouth tight. The behavior exhibited by Sergeant Wilcox and Officer Malloy is not reflective of our values. I watched from my hotel room, arms, crossed eyes, narrowed. It was the kind of sentence that tries to patch a bullet wound with a Band-Aid. He continued, "Effective immediately, both officers have been terminated from the force. An independent oversight committee will review all prior complaints associated with their patrols." Someone in the audience yelled, "What took you so long?" Linfield didn't answer. He just looked tired. But tired doesn't fix broken. That same week, CNN, MSNBC, and BBC World News reached out for interviews. I declined everyone. I wasn't looking for headlines. I was looking for systemic consequences. So I made one public statement on my own terms. On camera, at the Pentagon, with my uniform on. No teleprompter, no PR script. I looked straight into the lens and said, "This nation entrusts power to those who vow to protect. But when that power is abused, justice must be swift, visible, and uncompromising. Not for me, but for every citizen without a rank, without a camera, without a voice." That speech was viewed over 12 million times in the first 24 hours. But that wasn't the moment the wall fell. No, that moment came in a courtroom. The civil trial launched by Wilcox's attorney finally went to hearing. She accused me of defamation, claimed the incident had emotionally scarred her and destroyed her reputation, said she'd received death threats, lost her home, and had been vilified unfairly. Her lawyer painted a picture of a dedicated officer overwhelmed by the pressure of the job. And then they made a crucial mistake. They called Rodriguez to the stand. He looked nervous at first, eyes flicking from the judge to the crowd. But when he opened his mouth, what came out wasn't fear. It was truth. I saw Sergeant Wilcox pull her gun on a driver once for not rolling down the window fast enough. She joked about teaching people lessons. She said if someone wore military medals, they were probably fake. Every sentence was a sledgehammer to the wall, and when her lawyer tried to discredit him, he calmly pulled out screenshots, group texts, internal memes, racist jokes she had forwarded, digital nails in her professional coffin. When I took the stand, I didn't rehearse. I didn't need to. I simply told the story, not with anger, with clarity. I was not angry when they cuffed me. I was focused. Focused on surviving, on remembering every detail. Focused on making sure the next person didn't have to carry what I carried. I paused. I have led soldiers through war. I've stood at funerals with mothers who will never see their sons again. And I've stood in silence while injustice pretended to wear a uniform of honor. But this time, I chose to speak. Silence, the kind that hums with gravity. The jury took less than 2 hours. Unanimous verdict, not guilty. Wilcox's countersuit was dismissed with prejudice. Her face crumbled not in shock, but in a kind of stunned realization that her world once so comfortably structured had been rewritten. And I wasn't the only one holding the pen. Malloy disappeared from public view. Last I heard, he left the state. A quiet resignation filed under personal reasons. Rodriguez, promoted. Reassigned to the department's new Community Justice Division. I sent him a quiet note. You spoke when it mattered. That's what real courage looks like. He wrote back 2 words. Thank you. As for Wilcox, her name became a cautionary tale. Police academies used the case in ethics training. HR seminars opened with a still frame of her smirk beside the patrol car. No badge, no pension, no legacy, just a name etched into history as the moment the blue wall finally cracked open. And me, I returned to Washington, saluted at every checkpoint. But something inside had shifted. Not broken, not burdened, awakened. I had always fought for freedom. Now I understood what it meant to fight for dignity. Not just mine, ours. The day of Maya's graduation was warm and golden. The kind of May afternoon where the air hangs still, as if even the wind wants to pause and watch history unfold. I sat in the front row in full uniform, not because I needed the attention, but because she asked me to. Auntie C. Maya had whispered the night before, "You earned those medals. Wear them. Let them see. Let them see. Let them all see what resilience looks like when it survives humiliation and still stands tall." She walked across that stage with her head-high gown pressed curls, bouncing with each proud step. When the dean called her name, Maya Dawson, magna cum laude, political science future civil rights attorney, the crowd erupted. But it wasn't just applause, it was recognition of a legacy, of a fight, of a quiet revolution born on sidewalks and courtrooms and behind the lenses of smartphones. I stood and saluted her, not as a general, but as an aunt, as a survivor, as a woman who chose not to break. After the ceremony, we sat under a magnolia tree just outside the auditorium. She held her diploma like a weapon forged in hope. "I was so angry when it happened," she said quietly. "I wanted to scream to fight everyone who didn't see you." I smiled. They didn't need to see me, baby. They needed to see the truth. She turned to me, serious now. "Does it ever stop hurting?" I paused, then answered honestly, "No, but the hurt becomes a map. It tells you where the battle lines are." In the weeks after the trial, legislation passed. The Dawson Bill, a federal mandate requiring law enforcement to verify identity before detainment, especially when military ID is presented. Mandatory de-escalation training. Civilian oversight boards with real authority. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And sometimes something is enough to change the next story. A reporter caught me outside the Pentagon one morning. "General Dawson, how does it feel to know your story changed the system?" I turned to her. "My story didn't change the system. The people did. The ones who watched, who refused to look away, who picked up the phone, who marched, who spoke. I just stood still long enough for them to realize they needed to move." She looked stunned, but I meant every word. I wasn't the hero. I was the mirror. And you were the light that finally saw itself. At night, I find myself returning to that moment on the sidewalk. The cold metal of the hood, the weight of the cuffs, the sound of the crowd holding its breath. And then I return to the moment I looked into the camera and refused to disappear. That's the moment I carry with me. That's the moment I pass on. Today, the uniform still hangs in my closet, pressed, untouched, waiting, because the battle isn't over. It never really is. But now I fight differently, with policy, with presence, with peace, the kind of peace you pay for with years of silence, with fists unclenched, with backs unbowed, the kind that doesn't come easy, the kind that must be earned. At Maya's graduation party, she stood up to toast. To my Auntie Celeste, she said, voice trembling but bold, who taught me that silence is not strength, and dignity is not weakness. To every person who's ever been dismissed, ignored, or cuffed for daring to exist with pride, we see you now. The room clapped. I didn't. I just placed my hand over my heart, because sometimes applause isn't the victory. Being seen is. I hung a small flag outside my home that week, not out of pride, but out of defiance. A neighbor passed by, tipped his cap, and said, "That's the bravest thing I've seen all year." I smiled. It wasn't bravery. It was clarity. And once you see the truth, you don't go back to blindness. Children ride their bikes past my house again. Birds sing without sirens to drown them out. And Maya, she's applying to law school with a personal statement titled, "My Aunt the General." I don't know how history will remember me, but I know this. If peace is a fire, then justice is the wood we stack to keep it burning. And I'll keep stacking, every day, until the fire lights the whole damn sky. In the end, this was never just a story about a wrongful arrest. It was about identity dignity and the unshakable truth that no uniform, no badge, and no title can protect someone from bias, but courage can overcome it. Major General Celeste Dawson stood still while the system tried to erase her, and that stillness became a roar. A quiet defiance that lit a fire across the nation, because sometimes the most powerful weapon is simply the refusal to stay silent. So now we ask you, what would you do if the world refused to see who you are? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of what real strength looks like. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories of justice resilience and powerful twists that will leave you speechless. And don't forget to hit the notification bell because the next story might just change how you see the world. Truth speaks, and when it does, walls fall.